I've lived in New York City my whole life. I grew up on the Lower East Side. We have a lot of pride down there, and we aren't afraid to show it. I always loved the city, and as a kid, we thought we were the biggest stuff since sliced bread. I remember nodding to the police officer on our block and getting the nod back. That made me feel like such a big shot. Living in the city means that you will see some weird stuff. It's completely unpredictable, too. Sometimes it's cool and happy, like the big parades and New Year's celebrations. Sometimes it's just loud and a pain, like when you hear the sirens start going off in the middle of the night and never stopping. It's a big city with a lot of weird stuff in it. I remember the first time I thought I may have seen something weird, but it's nowhere near as strange as what I'm actually writing to you about. No, the first encounter is small potatoes compared to that, but I'm going to start with the small story and build up. I was out biking with my buddy and it was really hot out. Our air conditioner at home wasn't working, so riding bikes around the neighborhood was basically the only way to feel any relief from the hot air. August in the city is really stifling with all that heat reflecting off the pavement and buildings. Anyway, we were biking when I saw something in the storm drain. It was like two yellow floating lights peeking out at us. Did you ever see that movie, It? Yeah, it was like that creepy clown demon thing in the gutter, but just yellow eyes. I was riding my bike fast and didn't get a great glimpse of it. I really didn't think I thought much of it as a kid. I remembered it again, though, immediately after this latest encounter. That bike incident happened like 20 years ago. I ended up getting a pretty good job right out of high school. I never went to college, though. School just wasn't my thing. I tried to study hard, but it never came easy. Maybe I have one of those learning disabilities or something. Maybe I have some bigger issue in my head, like I'm a psycho or something, and that explains why I've seen these weird things. I don't know, I'm just trying to grasp any possible semi-logical reason. Anyways, here's the real big potatoes story. So, out of high school, I started working. I started working for the New York City sewer utility as basically a grunt worker. It kind of stunk, but I got health insurance and my mom needed medicine for her blood pressure. We didn't have much money growing up, so I viewed it as a way to give back to her. Eventually, I got good at my job and the bosses noticed. They say hard work pays off, and it sure did for me. I eventually got upgraded to an inspector and have basically worked by myself ever since then. New York City has a sewer system called a combined sewer. About 60% of all the sewers in the city are part of this combined sewer. That means that all the little sewers and drains that come out of the buildings feed into one really big pipe. I spent a lot of time alone in those really big pipes, making sure that they'd be ready in case of a big storm, like Superstorm Sandy. So this really brings me to the whole reason why I'm writing to you now. I was down in one of these big combined drains all by myself, just like any other day. I was having a good time that day and moving fast. I wanted to get out of work early to bring my mom to the doctor. These combined sewers are usually pretty dry, unless it's right after a big storm or something. It hadn't rained in a week or two, so it was unusual that this combined sewer had the amount of water in it that it did. It was a solid 2 or 3 feet extra of water. And that's the first weird thing that stuck out to me. The second weird thing that stuck out to me was that there was obviously something moving in the water. I've had to deal with this before. People's idiot cats fall down a drain, or a raccoon gets stuck or something dumb like that, and they end up splashing and drowning, and I have to call animal control. That's what I thought all the ripples were. It's pretty dark down in those sewers, but I could tell that whatever was moving in that water was bigger than a raccoon. I tried to shine my light on it, and when I did, I saw something really weird. It was scaly and spiny and moving fast through the water. I totally froze when I saw that, with all the stories of alligators in the sewers coming into my head. I beamed my light on and watched as it moved down the sewer tunnel. Eventually, the angle wasn't right, and I couldn't see it anymore. There was lots of debris in the water, and I really second-guessed myself, thinking maybe it was a branch or something. I know that it wasn't because of what I saw next. Remember those yellow eyes I'd seen as a kid, looking at me out of the sewer? I swear they were looking at me again like 100 feet away, straight out of the darkness. And it wasn't just one set of eyes. I swear I counted 5 sets of them, all yellow, staring straight out at me, making eye contact with me. I'm pretty sure I saw one of them blink. I have never moved so fast through a sewer tunnel, up the ladder, across the parking lot, and into my truck. My heart was pounding as I sat in my truck. I got another inspector to check out that tunnel with me, and he swears he didn't see anything. This is why maybe I think I have something wrong in my head. I can't find any explanation to what I saw. Okay, I really don't remember much, but I'll try to give you as many details as possible. It was just such a surreal experience that I second-guess myself on almost everything. At this point, I've probably gone over it 1,000,000 times in my head, trying to figure out if I even believe myself. I've decided that I do believe what happened, and that's why I'm passing my story on to you now. I guess here's why I think that it's actually real. I don't drink, I don't do drugs, and I don't watch scary movies. I have a strong mind, and I trust my senses. And for that reason, I really do think that what I saw was real. But it's hard to not second-guess yourself when you experience something so out of the ordinary. So my wife and I were driving back from the movies. It was really late because we'd gone to the drive-in. They don't start until the sun sets, and we stayed for the second movie, the double feature. So since we did that, we weren't on our way back home until after midnight. Also, the drive-in was about an hour from our house, so it was going to be very late by the time we got home. Most of the drive was on the highway, but there were some back roads we had to navigate too. And they truly were back roads through dark, wooded areas. There were no streetlights, no house lights, not even light from the night sky on that night. This had been great for the movies, but not for driving home. It was overcast, and the only real light was from our headlights. That, I believe, is why the light we saw stood out so clearly. It's really the thing that I remember the clearest. It has stood out the most in my mind as I have gone over the details of the encounter over and over in my head. We didn't see the light straight on. I actually noticed it in my rearview mirror. It was weird to see in the rearview mirror because the light was red, so I knew right away that it wasn't the headlights of another car coming up behind us. It was red and fairly small, and it also seemed very, very stationary. It sat in the lower right-hand corner of my mirror and didn't really move at all. The light was visible in the mirror for probably 2 minutes. We were just driving along and it stayed in that lower corner the whole time. Then, when we went around a bend in the road, the light disappeared momentarily. I wondered if maybe it was an emergency vehicle or some other vehicle out of the ordinary, and we just couldn't hear its siren. But then, when we were back on a straight section of road, the light appeared again in our mirror. This time, it was bigger, which made me instantly think that whatever the light belonged to was closer to us. I thought all this was weird, but not like scary yet. It started to get scary really quickly after that. Over the course of just a few seconds, the light began to grow noticeably bigger, still in the rearview mirror. It was illuminating the warning notification that was now popping up on my mirrors, which was beginning to make me very uneasy. You know, the objects in mirror are closer than they appear. Message. The red orb was gaining on us very quickly, until suddenly it seemed like it was right behind us. I could now see its glow casting shadows on my dashboard. My heart was hammering at this point. I wanted to speed up and drive away as fast as possible, but the road had quite a few bends at this point, and I was afraid of going off the road into the ditch. Obviously, my wife was seeing all of this too, and she was also starting to freak out. The thought of a carjacking entered both of our heads. She was begging me to go faster, which I was trying my best without losing control on the dark roads. She was clutching my arm in fear so hard that it hurt. I dared to quickly turn around to get a better view, and I could see it. The red orb was right behind us, probably only 10 feet from our bumper, and that's where my memory of this whole thing stops. Next thing I knew, My wife and I were sitting in our car, but we were pulled over and parked along the side of the road. We were both upright in our seats with our seatbelts on. I had both hands on the steering wheel, and the strangest thing of all, the sun was rising. I don't know what happened, but I do know that I was absolutely terrified, and so was my wife. I remember her screaming my name, begging me to drive faster. I remember how tightly I gripped the steering wheel. I remember how I could barely keep my eyes on the road ahead of me, trying to watch whatever awful thing was coming up behind me in the rearview mirror. And then nothing until we were parked, looking at the sun. My wife has suggested we drove through some strange chemical field, maybe let off by a local farmer, but of course that didn't really seem plausible. But our minds were trying to come with everything. Were we so tired that we decided we couldn't drive all the way home and had pulled over to sleep? No, that didn't make sense for so many reasons, including how could we have both have had the same dream? And who sleeps with their seatbelt on, gripping the steering wheel? No, that explanation doesn't make any sense to me. I think that something happened that we don't remember, that whatever the red orb was, it was trying to catch us or overtake us, and I think it did catch us, and something happened that we can't remember, and that's really scary. Like I said, I have questioned this experience a lot. I've tried to figure out any logical explanation, but I can't. There is just no way my wife and I had the exact same dream. This is my first time writing it all down. Up until this point, I've just thought about it and talked about it with my wife. Now that I'm writing it down, it really seems extra real. I am 100% sure that something strange and unnatural, supernatural even, happened to us that night. We're just not sure what it was. I've been a park ranger for 15 years. I worked most of that time in the ponderosa forests of Arizona. But a few years ago, I headed back up north. My family's from Twin Falls, Idaho. My parents are getting older, so I wanted to be closer to check on them more often. I got a post at Craters of the Moon National Monument. I had a research position, so I was moving into a pretty remote station. It was quite a distance from the nearest town. After I moved in, it seemed like things kept going wrong. The solar power was glitchy and wasn't working half the time. My sleep was suffering from weird disturbances. There were a lot of species of bats there, which was fine, but they kept getting into my cabin somehow. I kept getting awakened by flapping and squeaking. I couldn't find how they were getting in. I lived in the middle of juniper and scraggly pine and sagebrush, and for some reason that landscape gave me an eerie feeling. It felt so different from the southwest ponderosa forest that I was used to. About 2 months into the job, I started hearing something walking and scratching on the deck at night. Sometimes it even sounded like it was scratching on the door. The area was known for its wood rats, so I chalked it up to that. Whenever I went to check it out, nothing was there. I assumed they scurried away when I opened the door. Then I started finding these dismembered bats. Sometimes they were torn in half, but mostly I'd just find their wings on my deck. I've always been a relaxed person, so the fact that I was feeling so edgy was out of character for me. Whenever I'd leave the cabin at night, I had an eerie feeling like I was being watched. One night, I was getting back from my shopping run that I did once a week. While I was parking, I got a bad feeling. I got out of the truck and was hit by this heavy smell. It was like a mix of wet dog and super concentrated urine. I went around to the passenger side to get my groceries. I looked to the left of the cabin and saw 2 glowing eyes about 50 feet from my front door. They looked to be about 5 or 6 feet in the air. I was freaked out, to say the least. I started yelling, "Get the hell out of here," but the eyes just crouched lower down. I assumed it might be a bobcat or a mountain lion, but I wouldn't normally associate that scent with a big cat, so that seemed odd. I threw a piece of wood toward it, and it leaped back a bit, but it didn't make any sound. I threw 3 or 4 more pieces at it, and it retreated a little further back. At this point, I abandoned the groceries and started fumbling with my keys. I made a mad dash for the front door and managed to get inside. When I came out, the eyes looked a bit closer. I couldn't get a good look at it. It was out of range of the porch light. I had no real way to protect myself, so I kept throwing pieces of wood with one hand. Finally, the thing walked away into the brush. I waited for a good 10 or 15 minutes before I rushed to get my groceries and get back inside. I eventually calmed down enough to make dinner. I couldn't imagine what was attracting it to my deck. I kept the place clean and was obsessive about not having a trace of food around. A couple hours later, I was sitting at the table reading and I heard that scratching sound again. This time I could swear I also heard this low, growling sound. By then I was feeling like a nervous wreck. It felt like the thing was stalking me. I went to the window and raised the blinds about an inch and looked out. I assume it saw the movement because when I looked out, it had its back to me and was heading off the deck. I just froze when I saw a monster over 6 feet tall standing on 2 legs. It wasn't a cat at all. It looked like an upright canine creature with a humped back and massive shoulders. The legs almost looked human but were huge, and the knees bent backward like a dog. I was just shocked at the size. When it got about 20 feet away, it turned around and I saw the face of a demonic-looking wolf. I was shaking so bad, but I managed to open the window a crack and was ready to shoot it right through the screen. It shot off into the darkness like a rocket. I've never seen something that big move that fast. I've never been so scared in my life. My mind had no reference point for an animal like that. I slept on the couch with one eye open that night. I'm sure I woke up at least every hour thinking I heard something. In the morning, a trail crew came up and we found huge tracks on the porch and leading away from the cabin. Huge canine tracks with long claws. After that night, I always thought I heard scratching on the deck but never found tracks. I was afraid I was losing it. As soon as possible, I got transferred to the main guard station where I could be around coworkers a lot of the time. But eventually, I convinced my parents to move to Arizona, and I went back to the park I was familiar with. I just couldn't take that kind of stress. I live in Northern Virginia and used to love getting out and exploring some of the lesser-known spots in the area. There's a park that almost no one knows about. That's a real throwback to pre-Civil War times. There are completely untouched antebellum homesteads in the area, too. There's a Revolutionary War wagon route and old Civil War trenches and quite a few random graves. I'm fascinated with that era of time. So for me, it was always interesting to look around there. It's all located along a trail that goes behind fancy neighborhoods and golf courses. The trail's over 20 miles long, but I guess most people don't have time for that kind of history. I was there one day and came upon an old brick chimney. There was no sign of the house that used to surround it, just the chimney remained. It was in a kind of clearing that surprisingly didn't look very overgrown, and there was a little hearth in front of the chimney with a small stone fireplace opening. What struck me was how clean it looked, like someone had swept it recently. I poked around and spotted a little trail at the edge of the clearing. I followed it into the woods about 100 feet and came to where there was about a 3-foot-tall stone wall marking out a rectangular piece of property. On one edge, I found this old stairway leading down to what I assumed was a stone cellar. There was a wooden door down there that was a little propped open. It started to feel a little creepy, but I was so fascinated and couldn't help but go down to take a look. I pulled the door open and turned on my flashlight. There was a wooden table and a couple chairs. There were wooden shelves against the walls. I saw old glass jars of food on the shelves. Looked like flour and cornmeal and seeds and such. There were a few piles of stuff, old rags and clothes. I started thinking that maybe somebody was squatting there. I shined my flashlight around and saw that the cellar extended far back, and there was a short passage that led to another area. I went through to a small room. It was mostly dirt, more like a hidey hole than anything. There was this black, powdery stuff on the floors against the walls. In one spot, there was a little pile that looked like old, rotten fruit. I didn't know what to think. I kept wondering if it was a person or an animal who'd been hanging out there. I didn't have much more time to explore that day, so I left and headed home. It was probably about a month later before I was back in that area. I'd had a hard day at work, and it always calmed me down to get out on the trail and let go of some stress. I'd found what looked like an old family graveyard, and I was trying to read the names and dates. Some of the names were so faded, but I got really into trying to figure out some of the family history. It had gotten later than I realized and was starting to rain. I wasn't prepared with a hat or raincoat or anything, but this graveyard was really close to that old chimney I'd found before. I decided to go wait it out in that cellar since I was at least a mile from my car. I was sure it wouldn't rain for long. I found the chimney without any trouble and headed for the cellar. The door was a bit open like before, and I went in and sat in one of the chairs. I always carry a notebook and pen, so I pulled those out and my flashlight and started making some notes. Part of me always thought I'd eventually write a little history book of the area. I was there less than half an hour when I started hearing some rustling noises. I thought maybe there was an animal down the passageway in the little room. It was just soft rustling at first, so I'm thinking maybe some mice or something. But then the rustling got pretty loud, and I thought I heard a weird flapping sound. By then, I was freaking out thinking it was a bat or something. I stuffed my things in my pockets and headed for the door. I was glad it had stopped raining. I made sure to leave the door open and went up the stairs. It was around dusk, but I was curious about who was in there, so I went and sat on the stone wall farthest from the cellar. I hoped whatever it was would come out. I didn't really think it would, but after about 10 minutes, something opened the door further and I saw this shadowy shape. Okay, I was really freaking out now because it was something big, like 5 or 6 feet tall. Before I had much time to think, it jumped up all the steps at once. It turned its head toward me, but I didn't see any face. But I did see these horrible red eyes that looked like they were glowing and looking right at me. I tried getting to my feet and just tumbled backwards off the wall. I crouched down there looking over, and I kid you not, this thing spread out these huge, black, leathery-looking wings and half jumped and half flew up into the trees. Oh my freaking God. I split out of there running as fast as possible toward my car. I'm no runner, and by the time I got there, I thought I was going to die. I finally calmed down enough to drive, but all I could think on the way home was how I'd been in the cellar with that thing only like 10 feet away from me. How could something like that be real? I never went back there again. I don't know how I get myself into these situations. I mean, I don't even like to go camping. So many times I've tried and I just end up being cold and wet and uncomfortable. Also, I hate to admit it, but I barely know what to do with myself anymore when I don't have an internet connection. But I don't mind renting a cabin on occasion. I've found plenty of them that have electricity and even Wi-Fi sometimes. But I have this loyalty to a couple of my childhood friends, and they love camping. Especially the kind of camping where you have to hike in to get to your spot. So every once in a while, I let them talk me into it. They convinced me to go with them during one of our college breaks. Maybe it was because I was the one with the fancy tent. I had inherited it from my brother when he upgraded to an even bigger one. He had 2 kids and a wife, so he needed a lot of room. My friends had their eye on this place in the Great Smoky Mountains. The plan was for a 3-day trip with a lot of hiking in and camping and hiking out. It really was too cold for my liking, but things were going okay the first day. It was a sunny day in spite of the temperature. We did plenty of drinking that first night and had a blast laughing and talking. When I was laying in the tent that night looking up at the stars, it was almost pleasant. But the next morning, it was cloudy and kept raining on and off. I was trying to pack up and everything was getting soggy, and I was getting grouchy. If it had been raining steadily, I could probably have convinced the others to shorten the trip. but the sun kept peeking out and pretending like it was going to actually turn into a nice day. The rain turned into a mist that my friends thought was cool and kept saying how it would be fine. But during the afternoon, the temperature really dropped, and I couldn't even pretend to be having fun. I stopped walking and said I wasn't going any further, and since I had the only tent, they could either stay with me or go on without a shelter. We got the tent up and a fire going to dry out our clothes. At least we had more wine to raise our spirits, and the rain was holding off. We were trying to get into a jovial mood, but one of my friends started acting a little weird and nervous and kept looking off into the woods. It was starting to make me feel nervous too. I asked her what she was looking at, but she just said she felt a little off and kind of creeped out. Well, that didn't help my mood, and I got paranoid. The Great Smoky Mountains are known for having plenty of black bears. I had heard they were mostly harmless, especially if their cubs weren't threatened. I wasn't interested in taking any chances, though, and there were plenty of other things that could be hiding in the woods. We decided that since the weather had been so wet lately, it wasn't likely that anything would catch on fire. So we left the fire burning a little and went into the tent. It still wasn't raining, so we left the tent flap a little unzipped in order to keep an eye on the fire. I was really sleepy though, so I guess I dozed off right away. But it seemed like only a few minutes had gone by and I jolted out of my sleep and sat straight up. I thought for sure I heard something moving outside the tent. I looked at my friends and they were wide awake too. We looked out at the glow of the fire. The embers had burned down really low. I was straining my eyes and I thought I could make out some antlers just outside the tree line. I wanted to feel relief at the thought that it was only a deer. But for some reason, that sight made me feel ice cold to the core of my being. It made absolutely no sense. I had no fear of deer. It looked like it was stepping a little closer toward us. And when I saw the shape emerge, I was horrified. It couldn't be a deer because it was standing upright, and it seemed 7 or 8 feet tall. I wanted to scream or cry, but instead I just shut down. I saw these yellow eyes come glowing out of the darkness, and they seemed to be embedded in the skull of a deer. I had this weird thought that some devil creature had stolen the deer skull and was wearing it for its own evil purposes. There was a terrible smell of rotten flesh that drifted over to us, and we looked at each other like this was the end. When I looked at that thing, it actually seemed like it was dead, like some rotting corpse that was somehow walking around. It looked like it had tattered flesh hanging off of it. But the worst part was how it made me feel hollowed out, and I had the sense that I was possessed with a demonic hunger that could never be appeased. What happened then was so weird. We all spontaneously took each other's hands and closed our eyes and started to pray. And let me tell you, before this, there wasn't one religious bone in any of our bodies. I hadn't been in a church since I was 12 years old. My one friend looked and started describing how she could see a luminous, protective light surrounding our tent. She was sure it was an impenetrable light that the evil could not enter. We must have stayed in that circle together for 20 minutes, and eventually, the desolate feeling withdrew, and everything was back to normal. I don't know what more to say. The whole experience was mind-blowing, and I was left with some kind of faith that I still can't define.